46 years in 5 minutes. So I've got OTC deficiency, it's X chromosome linked, Urea Cycle Dissorder, OTC for short. So all your excess ammonia protein becomes ammonia through the liver. So we follow a really low protein diet, and we take ammonia scavenger drugs and amino acids, and we're all under control, and that's fine. So as a child, I didn't have a diagnosis, so I avoided all high protein foods, and I remember knowing something wasn't quite right. I've had 2 seizures before I was diagnosed. Now I've got good metabolic control, and I've got a doctor at the National Hospital in London. So diagnosis for myself and my daughter, who's now 20, came via the passing of my second boy. So I've had 2 more daughters since then, and one of them has OTC. We've all got different severity. So OTC has a 50% chance of inheritance, and we're the only diagnosed people in Cyprus. So we're very rare here. So basically, I'm here to sort of testify what UCD mums do. So we're kind of imperative to how these kids survive. These doctors here give instructions, and then we have to carry them all out. So it means getting your child to swallow harsh off-orphan medication 3-5 times a day. It means cooking a meal your child will actually eat, calculate all its protein, and then you might have to prepare 2 or 3 meals a day if they don't want to have those nut or milk top-ups at the end of the day, because it's 9 o'clock at night and you've got 8 exchanges to go. So that happens a lot. So you might have to create a meal for a really hungry kid and you've only got 2 exchanges to go. You've got to find a meal with 2 grams of protein so your child won't go to bed hungry. Because if they're hungry, they won't sleep, and then you won't sleep. So, what's the other bit? We've got it here. So, they've got to eat a very precise amount of protein, something like 1 gram per kilo. And dietitians like Marjorie will calculate it all, and they give us these instructions, and then we've got to put it into everyday life, every day. And then when your child goes for a sleepover like tonight, you're full of guilt because you know they're not going to hit their target. So you send text messages and say, give my kids sugar, because then things could go quite bad. So sometimes you've got to decide if your child's behaviour is just because they're a kid and trying their luck, or if it's because their ammonia's gone up. Then you've got to make a decision to take that child to ER. You've got to convince really busy doctors to take you seriously and read a protocol that they don't have time to read. And then that you've got to tell them that your child might seem absolutely fine, but they might go downhill really, really fast. And when they do take that ammonia draw, you've got to politely remind them to put it on ice, not use a tourniquet, because they're human and they might forget. You know, it's a rare test, so you've got to remind them. And sometimes they don't like you, and sometimes they do, and that's tough. So many deaths worldwide are just sort of due to weight loss diets, and many mothers that have died in childbirth have undiagnosed OTC, cot deaths, and things like that. So I'm a member of a worldwide group and a UK Urea Cycle Facebook group. A lot of these people are patients of you lot. And so, you know, here's where parents will go to sort of find some comfort when doctors can't give them any hope for the reality that they live every day. And what that reality looks like is something like your teenage child who's delayed might beat you up because she can't go out, she needs calories. She needs to pump calories into her stomach, then she'll freak out and beat you up. And then no one wants to give them medication for that behaviour. You've got to go through a panel and analyse, and you've got a parent at 12 o'clock at night saying, what am I going to do? And you're not a doctor, so you've just got to listen. And then, you know, you might have a 4-year-old that's never going to speak. And this mum knows their child's never going to speak, and she'll decide at 11 o'clock at night that it's upset her because the doctor told her she's not going to speak, but you know that anyway. So these kids sort of live on all ends of this autistic spectrum, and many are epileptic, even if they're diagnosed at birth. Another story is you might have a very healthy son, aged 14, who will just die for no good reason because he's got OTC and no one knew. And this is what people live with. This was in affluent London. So it's not got prejudice. It can hit anyone at any time that seems fine. So we've got another story of this lady in Australia. So I'm going to try, he's at the end so you'll see it later. You know, this lady had a university graduated son, big strapping lad. He went in for nasal surgery, fell into a coma. No one knew what was wrong with him. Turns out he's got OTC, and she has to care for him 24/7 just to keep him alive. So, on the good side, these groups, you know, we managed to meet in person, and these are some pictures of my daughter and the son. So this lady came to visit me. She lives in a village in England, and she came to see us. And this is Eduardo, who's from Australia, the case I was saying earlier. So when these families get together, and we do get together when we go to Great Ormond Street, it's not just good for the kids that can share that little bit of orphan medication that tastes disgusting and they share their meds. That's a special moment, you know, and your healthy kids will play and they can bond and say, you know what, we might be a bit weird, but you're weird too. You know, so that's rare and that's special, and you kind of hold on to it. So that's Eduardo. He's the guy that I said went for nasal surgery. You know, who would have thought? So another side of the social media, because we're all on social media, is when you've got cases like baby Charlie Gard, worldwide news. He has a very rare metabolic disorder, and after some time the doctors felt, right, treatment's futile, let's just let nature take its course. And you've got parents who want to hold on to the hope, give it in by another doctor abroad who didn't see him or read the evidence. And then there are court cases, and Trump gets involved, and the Pope gets involved, and new papers are sold, and that's metabolic. So it impacts everything. You know, that case hit us all really hard, because to us, those parents were like family, and those doctors were like family. So we felt very torn in that case. So in everyday life, doctors, what we want is doctors that are humble enough to say, you know what, we don't know, but that they're wise enough to read an emergency protocol, and if they're not sure, that they'll find a consultant abroad and say, you know, I'm stuck, what should we do? This has happened to us many times at Limassol Hospital. 99% of the time I'm heard, and in the 1%, my complaint was full of emotional baggage of fear, you know? So, what am I grateful for? I'm sort of grateful for the progress in gene therapy trials. You know, since 1999 in the US, we've got 18-year-old Jesse Gelsinger, and he was like the first publicly known death to gene therapy trials. And the FDA found negligence. And when we were diagnosed, it was only 3 years later. So your Google search on urea cycle disorders, or OTC, were a handful. And that was one of the cases that we read. So that's how we began, and this is where we are today, that, you know, 20 odd years later, we're all here, so that's encouraging. So what I wish for is that people that have got common disorders wouldn't take their healthcare for granted. You know, we count protein, a diabetic counts carbohydrates. A diabetic could walk into any doctor's office around the world and they would get advice, and they've got the free will to say to that doctor, I don't agree with you, I'm going to go and take the medication he's giving me. We don't have that. Some rare disorders have no diagnosis, there's no medicine, there's no treatment. And this is at a time where you've got a food chain and a lifestyle that creates disease, with the financial burden, and then there's rare patients that pay the biggest price, and it's not even their fault. You know, we didn't smoke a cigarette, we didn't eat McDonald's, you know, we were just born like that. So that's not to take away from the fact that health and healthcare is not complicated. And that's it. Thank you.